Fear is the path to the dark side.
We begin today with a Democracy Now! Exclusive. As the U.S. Central Command says it has no plans to reopen an investigation into the July 2007 helicopter attack that killed a dozen people in Baghdad, including 2 Reuters news staff, we'll play never-before-seen eyewitness interviews filmed the day after the attack. Military lawyers have reportedly been reviewing the classified video of the airstrikes released by the website WikiLeaks on Monday. But Rear Admiral Hal Pittman, director of communications at Central Command, which oversees the war in Iraq, said in a statement to Reuters, quote, Central Command has no current plans to reinvestigate or review this combat action. However, CENTCOM did make public a redacted series of records on the case, including investigations days after the attack by the air cavalry and infantry units that were involved in the incident. According to an investigation by the 1st Air Cavalry Brigade, the military concluded the aircrew, quote, accurately assessed that the criteria to find and terminate the threat to friendly forces were met in accordance with the law of armed conflict and rules of engagement. The chilling video footage taken from the U.S. military helicopter shows U.S. forces indiscriminately firing on Iraqis in the new Baghdad neighborhood of the Iraqi capital. The dead included 2 employees of the Reuters news agency, photographer Namir Noor Eldin and driver Saeed Chamad.
The video is from the July 12, 2007 attack on Iraqi civilians by U.S. troops, released Monday by the website WikiLeaks.org. Well, independent journalists Rick Rowley and David Enders were on the scene the very next day in 2007 and filed this exclusive report for Democracy Now!
We came to the Iraqi suburb of New Baghdad one day after a U.S. attack helicopter strike that killed 12 Iraqis, including a journalist and a driver working with Reuters. The U.S. military claimed that they were under attack from rocket-propelled grenades and small arms fire, and that all of the dead, except for the 2 Reuters employees, were insurgents. But local residents showed us the remains of a burnt-out van spattered with blood and told us a different story.
The helicopter came yesterday from there and hovered around. Then it came right here where a group of people were standing. They didn't have any weapons or arms of any sort. This area doesn't have armed insurgents. They destroyed the place and shot at people, and they didn't let anyone help the wounded.
I swear to God it was helicopters that attacked us. These people are all witnesses. They attacked us twice, not once.
Another resident went on to describe what happened to the man who tried to help the wounded.
The driver went to carry the injured, who had been shot in front of his eyes. While he was going to pick them up, the pilot of the helicopter kept flying above, watching the scene. They started firing at the wounded and the dead. The driver and the 2 children were also there. The helicopter continued shooting until none of the bodies were moving.
We asked the crowd of people what might have prompted the attack, and they said that when the journalist arrived, residents quickly gathered around him.
A group of civilians had gathered here because people need cooking oil and gas. They wanted to demonstrate in front of the media and show that they need things like oil, gas, water, and electricity. The situation here is dramatically deteriorating. The journalists were walking around, and then the Americans started shooting. They started shooting randomly and targeted peaceful civilians from the neighborhood.
There were children in the car. Were they carrying weapons? There were 2 children.
Do we help the wounded or kill them? They killed all the wounded and drove over their bodies. Everyone witnessed it. And the journalist was among those who was injured, and the armored vehicle drove over his body.
The U.S. forces, who call themselves friendly forces, were telling us on speakers that they were here to protect and help us. We heard those words very clearly, but what we saw was the opposite of that. We demand the American Congress and President Bush supervised their soldiers' actions in Iraq.
For Democracy Now!, this is Rick Rowley and Dave Enders with Big Noise Films.
Special thanks to Ala Majid for assisting with the translation of that piece. Rick Rowley joining us now in our studio, independent journalist with Big Noise Films. He's traveled to Iraq frequently as an unembedded journalist since the 2003 invasion. So describe, when you saw this WikiLeaks footage, you were there the next day in 2007.
I first saw the story at midnight and realized that we'd been there, and the next morning rushed to check the footage and found that, in fact, it was the same event. But when we went out there that day, Dave and I, we weren't looking to document an American massacre. We went to this neighborhood because this is a neighborhood full of refugees. And as soon as we arrived and got out of our car, an experience that will be common to all unembedded journalists, we were instantly surrounded by a crowd of people who took us to where the attack happened and started telling their stories.
So, in other words, when you went there hadn't even been a military or public announcement of what had happened the day before? The
Reuters had reported it, that it had happened somewhere, but we didn't know the details, and we certainly weren't looking for it. We were unembedded doing a story on refugees and happened upon this neighborhood.
But the military initially claimed that it was all insurgents that had died, but obviously as we have now seen, as the world has now seen from the video, the soldiers in the helicopter realized that children had been killed almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean, the children were injured. They didn't actually die.
Injured.
But yeah, I mean, the thing that was most chilling to me about this, as an independent journalist who works unembedded often, is that when the reports came out, the military investigations came out a few days later. You can read them all on the internet now, and they basically, I mean, essentially, they blame the reporters for causing this. They say they did three things wrong. First, they failed to identify themselves to a helicopter gunship flying, I don't know, hundreds of feet above their heads. Second, their proximity to armed insurgents was reason for them to be killed. And third, their furtive attempt to take a photograph of American troops. I mean, so first of all, there is no reason at all to believe or to conclude that any of the people in that picture are armed insurgents. I mean, you can see two men with Kalashnikovs, but this is 2007 in Baghdad. This is the height of the Civil War, when dozens of bodies a day were being picked up from the street, when sectarian militias filled the Iraqi security forces, the police and the army. Every neighborhood in Baghdad organized its own protection force, and it was legal at the time for every household to own a Kalashnikov in Iraq, and every household I ever went to did. So the presence of two men dangling at their sides Kalashnikovs in a crowd of civilians who have no weapons at all, I mean, is absolutely no, I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous.
I want to play, Rick, another clip from the U.S. helicopter footage. Here, the voices in the cockpit laugh as a Bradley tank drives over a body of one of the Iraqi victims.
Frequency. I just drove over a body. Yeah. Frequency. I just drove over a body. Yeah.
Viper 5-2, report free change zone 4.
That is from the military's own footage. Again, this is military footage from the Apache helicopter with those radio transmissions of the soldiers speaking to each other. What did the residents say about that body?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a journalist, and I go and talk to people and report what they said. And these residents came and told me that the man who they drove over was alive, that he had crawled out of the van that had been shot to pieces, and that he was still alive when the Americans drove over him and cut him in half, basically, with a Bradley or tank or whatever armored vehicle they were driving in.
Well, we're going to link to both the Army documents, their initial investigation, as well as your piece, and the WikiLeaks.org footage. WikiLeaks says they got this footage from someone within the military who wanted this information out. Thanks very much, Rick Rowley. Rick Rowley, independent journalist with Big Noise Films, who has traveled to Iraq and Afghanistan frequently as an unembedded journalist. He was at the site of the 2007 attack the next day. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.